world. Hi, my name's Sophia. Today we'll be talking a little bit about threat intelligence. I must admit that was partially created by ChatGPT because I'm not a very creative person. So I do apologize for the cringiness and cheesiness of that title. So the whole reasoning behind this talk was, I'm fairly new to threat intelligence. So I started in pen testing. I moved over about 2 years ago and I didn't really know what it was or what I was getting myself into. All I knew was I was really bored at testing APIs. So I needed a change of pace, and that's how I ended up in threat intelligence. So hopefully today we'll take you through a journey of just what is threat intelligence, how it can be applied in different use cases in cybersecurity, and if you are in a position in the organization to make those decisions, how it could potentially benefit your organization too. Sick. So who am I? So my name's Sophia. I'm the strategic threat intelligence lead for a company local to the area. And as I said, I was previously a pen tester. So my kind of generic career was I finished uni. I did 2 years of pen testing. I then moved into hacking cars for a bit. That was a bit of a weird spiel. But then ended up going back to pen testing and then ended up in threat intelligence. So I'm also the admin for the Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society. So if you haven't seen us already, we are in a community stand in the hall. I don't know if you've got any Haribos left, so you might have missed out on that, but we do have lots of stickers, so we can give you some stickers. And the Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society are a non-for-profit meetup that we run quarterly around Cheltenham. It's primarily for people that want to upskill their technical skills, but it's also a place where you can just sort of meet, have a chat, and network with like-minded individuals. I'm also the Security Queens co-founder, so Security Queens was something I founded back in lockdown, which seems like an age ago. I was just bored, so I decided to create more work for myself and created Security Queens with another fellow woman in cyber, where we regularly blog and we also do conference talks around the UK. I studied cybersecurity management at Bournemouth University, and I know there's some Bournemouth people here, so thank you for travelling. I was team captain for Team UK at the European Cybersecurity Challenge, which was basically a massive CTF. So represented the UK 3 times as well. I won a bunch of stuff along this whole career journey of mine since I started back in, I dread to think, 2016 when I started uni. And also TV certified cybersecurity expert, so you might have seen me on Channel 4's Hunted as a cyber hunter as well. So a little talk through what we're going to do today. So a brief introduction to cyber threat intelligence. This is quite a high level talk. So if you don't know what threat intelligence is, you're in the right place. If you do, you might get bored. I'm really sorry. Well, so we're also going to go through a snapshot of the UK cyber threat landscape. So what we're sort of concerned about, particularly in the UK, the benefits of an established threat intelligence program in an organization, and how you can start to use sort of CTI to fight those cyber battles. So things like advancing technology, combating different problems, embracing things like AI, machine learning to improve those solutions. And also a little closing Q&A. So I'll try to drag this out as much as I can so you don't have to ask me too many questions. So first of all, what is threat intelligence? So when I first started threat intelligence, I literally Googled like cyber threat intelligence, and it came up with like all these really scary things. I was like, oh my God, like why there's so many diagrams, why there's so many numbers, why there's so many words. And I kind of got scared and thought I was like making a terrible, terrible mistake moving away from pen testing. So we're going to break it down a little bit more than that. And we're going to talk about what really is threat intelligence. So this is one of my favorite definitions of threat intelligence. And one of my favorite sort of sayings is there's no intelligence without data. So threat intelligence is basically data that is collected, processed, and analyzed to try to understand your threat actor or adversary. So you're thinking about their behaviors, their motivations, their type of objectives. Threat intelligence enables us to hopefully make more sort of data-driven decisions and more actionable decisions based on those findings. So if you think about sort of the cybersecurity attack lifecycle, we're trying to sort of be proactive against those threat actors rather than reactive to when something happens. So there's 3 levels of cyber threat intelligence. So in my current role, I sit kind of high up. So I do a lot of executive summaries. I talk to a lot of scary CISOs, and I do a lot of translation of technical data into actionable things for an organization. So when we talk about strategic threat intelligence, we want to know the who and the why. We want to know an overview of that organization's landscape. And we don't want to make it too complicated. We want to keep it really high level. And we want to keep it very kind of away from the ones and zeros and the indicators of compromise, that kind of thing. So this kind of intelligence might help a business inform their decisions around budget, policy, resource allocation. It is primarily non-technical, so if we think maybe your C-suite who don't have a technical background, we need to create that intelligence so it'd be consumable by someone like them. Shared in the form of reports or briefings, so I live my life in Word, which is absolutely fantastic. And it focuses on the long term. So we're thinking about long-term strategy, where we can spend our money, how to make an organization's security defense sort of more robust. So when we talk about operational cybersecurity, we focus on something called TTPs. So TTPs, which some of you may have heard before, is called tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we want to know how they're getting into an organization. So you want to know what kind of capability they have, what their intent is, what opportunities they're using, the method of their attack. Are they using a particular methodology? Are they using particular tools? That kind of thing. So on this level, you might identify things called indicators of compromise to respond to threats. So you might be working with other sort of departments in organizations, so incident response, defense, CERT, that kind of thing, seeing what intelligence they might collect. And this particular sort of level of intelligence will help you attribute an attack to threat to adversary. So instead of seeing like, oh no, we're breached, we want to know how we've been breached. We want to know who's breached us. So we might use things like indicators of compromise to sort of stitch together an attack path or an attack pattern to try to attribute them to that. So intelligence might include TTP information, but most importantly, it focuses sort of on the medium term and brings in sort of more technical staff of that organization. So as I said, incident response, SOC analysts, threat hunters, IT managers, people able to implement that kind of level of intelligence in their day-to-day job. And finally, we're going to talk about tactical. So the what is it? What's actually happening? So this is usually in the form of sort of automated intelligence. So you might collect feeds from different sources. You might collect loads of IOCs, or you might get a different set of data from the incident response team or the SOC team that will just come as an indicator of compromise, or literally sort of like ones and zeros, IP address, file hashes, that kind of thing. It might be shared in the form of APIs. Or sticks and taxi, which are different standards for threat intelligence information. And it's usually raw data that hasn't been analyzed yet. So we have to think about things like, sorry, I had a little bit of there we go. We have to focus things around sort of real-time alerts. So anything that's been captured by the incident response team or the SOC team, or perhaps your SIEM solution, we can use in this kind of level of intelligence. So now we're going to talk about the threat intelligence lifecycle. And I feel like a teacher here, so I'm really sorry if I'm teaching some of you to suck eggs. But the threat intelligence lifecycle is basically kind of a framework that helps shape those threat intelligence activities in an organization. So it's very sort of, it depends which source you go to. It's either 5 or 6 steps, or sometimes 7 steps, but we'll focus on this one today. So the first step of the threat intelligence lifecycle is planning objectives and direction. So before you do any collection of data or analyzing of that data, you want to basically identify your intelligence requirements, why you're doing this intelligence exercise, the different objectives you want to get from it, and you might do things like resource allocation, putting people on a job, that kind of thing. So then we've got to collect the data. So we've got to collect data, and that could be either from internal or external sources. So if we think of internal sources, it might be like network logs, or it might be packets from your Wireshark instance, or whichever. When we think about external collection, we want things about like open source intelligence, media, news, blogs, white papers, all that fun stuff. So once we have all this fantastic data, and you may and will have a lot of it, we want to try process that data. So try to make it into a bit more consumable format. So things like removing false positives. If we've got a huge amount of data, trying to pick that data that's actually useful to us. So getting rid of irrelevant data for our objectives of the program. Just to make it a bit more palatable and easier to kind of analyze later in the threat intelligence lifecycle. And then we go to analysis and production. So once we have that data, and it's the exact data we want, and it's not just lines and lines and lines of Excel, we can then analyze that data and produce it somehow. So when we analyze that data, we want to create that actionable intelligence from it. We're identifying how we can use that in the decisions we want to make. And then with producing that data, we need to think about our end user. So are you producing that data for a C-suite? So it might be better in the form of a briefing or a report. Are you producing it as a TI alert for maybe your SOC, which might be better handled in a stick or taxi format, maybe an indicator of compromise alert? So it's important to kind of think at this stage who you want to deliver that information to and making sure that you match that requirement as well. And finally, dissemination. It's no good going through all this trouble if you don't share it. So making sure that you share it to the people that will benefit from that. If you've identified in the first part of the threat intelligence lifecycle who's going to be involved in that threat intelligence exercise, making sure that it gets to the correct people. Cut phones not necessary, but if you want to use those, I won't judge. And finally, feedback. So we look back at all the amazing work we've done. We identify what didn't go so well, maybe things that we missed, and use that information to go back into the life cycle so it starts all over again. It's like a never-ending cycle. I do love my work, I promise. So a little bit about the evolution of threat intelligence and some sort of important things that kind of shape threat intelligence as it is today. So there's obviously lots of things that have happened in the world of computers and cyber, but I've picked out a few sort of milestones here. So in 1988, the Computer Emergency Response Team is established. So people kind of realized that we need to start thinking about how to react to events and how we can protect ourselves. So the 90s to the 2000s, you kind of see a rise in generic cybercrime, so things like phishing, ransomware, DDoS attacks, and organizations sort of start to realize that, oh, this is a thing, we need to start preparing ourselves for it, and we need to have the correct intelligence to try to protect ourselves from these attacks. As we move into the 2010s, we see lots of big, scary breaches in the news and the media, and then that kind of underlines the importance for monitoring and analyzing for TTPs by certain threat actors so that organizations can try proactively defend against those. So a few things around that. We've got the Sony Pictures breach in 2014. Ironically, we did talk about voting elections this morning, so we've got the supposed interference with the 2016 election, and we've also got the WannaCry ransomware epidemic, which obviously underlined the importance in trying to prevent and defend against ransomware. And finally, I guess this sort of current, a lot of organizations consider sort of CTI essential in some way or form, whether that be gathering that information, analyzing, or using external contractors to help them with that, and making sure they're sharing that information as well, either within that organization or within the industry sector. So there's like loads of different ways, and I do like a good graph, so thank you CrowdStrike for this. So there's loads of different ways that threat intelligence are used in the three sort of levels we talked about. So as you can see, tactical with thinking about threat feeds and real-time alerts. You might look into sort of malware analysis, that kind of thing. Operational, we're looking at threat actor profiling, kind of trying to figure out what's happening in the real world, who's doing these bad things. And then strategic, we're again looking at that long-term strategy, reporting into the C-suite, reporting into the execs, and going on with research, that kind of thing. And I'll just talk a little bit about the UK cyber threat landscape and what we kind of worry about nowadays. Very, very minimized. There's lots going on, obviously. So the key threats that we see in the UK come down to these sort of three things. I've just really simplified what's actually quite a complex picture, but here we are. So cybercrime, nation states, and hacktivism. So cybercrime, there's lots of things going on. There's some statistics in the middle there from NCC Group, where you have the top 10 most targeted sectors. So we're seeing a lot more ransomware attacks in industrials, and this is kind of driven by the digitalization of a lot of those processes. But interestingly, there was a bit of a weird spike in sort of total ransomware cases. So you can kind of see it was a little bit higher, but it's evened out. But there's been a lot of this in the news. So obviously there was the British Library attack, JD Sports, Manchester Police. Unfortunately, it's something that's ongoing and continues to kind of worry us in the threat landscape. Got lots of online fraud, so things like phishing, business email compromise, the Tinder swindler, and romance scams, that kind of thing. And also the use of AI and machine learning, so a lot of people getting their voices cloned in those kind of phishing attacks. So that's something that's a key worry for a lot of the public as well. So those Facebook marketplace scams where you have to sort of pay in advance, that kind of thing. We also have something called access brokers. So these are sort of adversaries which might compromise an organization and then try to sell that access into the dark web. So this is kind of making sort of cybercrime a little bit more accessible in a way. You don't have to kind of do that hard work. You can just buy the access off someone and go with your objectives that way. We've got a lot of hacktivism going on, especially with the turbulence within sort of Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot of hacktivist groups wanting to sort of back certain states. So this is kind of a post where, unfortunately, with everything going on in Russia and Ukraine, they were trying to target any allies of Ukraine. So there's loads of things like UK health institutions on there. There was lots of education targets on there too, and just sort of demonstrates that kind of overreaching kind of high-level overview. And we've also got nation-state sort of worries. So we've got a real concern around sort of nation-state actors. The difference being a lot of nation-state actors might have a lot more pre-positioning to do. They have a lot more resources, a lot more allocation that they can put into their attacks. So it's usually quite a longer sort of attack frame rather than someone just trying to like pop your business and try to get some data. There was obviously a lot of worry around sort of China, Russia, their involvement in trying to improve their human intelligence and online profiling as well. But it's not all doom and gloom, I promise. The benefits of threat intelligence. So there's loads of things that threat intelligence could help with, and some of those will address those key issues we worry about in the UK cyber threat landscape. So things like empowering organizations. So organizations feel more confident in themselves, being more confident in anticipating and reacting to threats, but also their mitigation and defense capabilities, particularly if they can interact with things like incident response teams or CERT teams, SOC analysts, that kind of thing. It helps people kind of enrich their knowledge about threat actors. So by improving their knowledge and attribution capability and attributing those attacks and campaigns to certain adversaries, it then also allows that collaborative knowledge that they can share with other people or industry partners. It supports incident response programs and strategies, and it also promotes a control culture of continuous learning to match the evolving landscape. So something I find not difficult, but it keeps me on my toes, is that I'm constantly having to learn, constantly having to keep an eye on new things. And that's something that can definitely help. But you can also track things like new vulnerabilities and bugs, but it also enables in-depth threat analysis too. And I had to do the whole strategic spiel of it might save you money. If you can proactively react to trying to prevent those breaches, fewer breaches, more efficient response might in the long term, in an ideal world, save the company a bit of money too. So how do we actually integrate threat intelligence to fight those cyber battles? One of the ones that I've mentioned quite a few times now is the use of the Security Operations Center and incident response. I'm really sorry, I did grab this diagram from somewhere, but I completely lost where I got it from. So if anyone wants to let me know, or they want credit for that, please let me know. So threat intelligence teams can help the sort of analysts and the people in those SOC center and the incident response inform their decisions. So hopefully triaging alerts, reducing false positives, making sure their time is better efficiently used. So alerts can be proactively issued to SOCs in incident response. So let's say in my day-to-day job, I do a lot of research about like new CVEs, what's being popped. And if I find something really interesting, I can then tell the SOC team and they can proactively implement the correct firewall rules or whatever they want to do to try to prevent that. So it might include things like attack behaviors or indicators of compromise. So we want things of like file-based indicators. So, this file hash is a bit dodgy, or this file name. Network-based indicators. So we know that this IP address is being used by this threat actor. Behavioral indicators. So like weird network traffic or system activity. Or things like artifacts, so configuration files, registry keys that might be left by that threat actor. So threat intelligence platforms, those known as TIPs, can be used to help inform these teams with the latest threats and IOCs. What's really good about TIPs, it kind of pulls in loads of different sources and curates it as a single feed, so you can all see it in one place, which is quite handy. And the most important thing being IOCs can help security teams, again, detect and prevent cyber threats and attacks more efficiently, so they can try to be that one step ahead if they know that this particular file or malware is being used in the wild, and they can attribute a file hash to that particular attack. They can then use that in their own defenses too. So threat intelligence platforms and feeds. So as I said, it combines intelligence from different sources and feeds. And through this, you can actually automate some sort of form of generating alerts too, which is quite handy. So what's really good about these feeds is they're constantly moving, they're constantly pulling real-time data in, and it enables a continuous flow for all those organizations as well. Tips can also be integrated with SIEM solutions, and benefits include sharing that intelligence and data, so anyone can sort of read that information and be able to consume it quite easily. It also centralizes that data, so you don't have 5 different pools of data or 5 different folders where data is sitting. You can actually just all focus on that one centralized location that you can analyze it from. It allows collaboration and information sharing during incidents as well. In a very high pressure kind of event where you might be breached or have an incident, something like a tip might be valuable in trying to keep a track of that different data flowing. And the most important thing being that constant stream of data. So it allows you to have access to the real-time data, the constant flow, and you're not having to worry about constantly updating yourself. So this is something that I do quite a lot. So as coming from a pen test background, I moved in sort of threat intelligence-led pen testing, creating that threat intelligence to give to the red team or the pen testing team so they can better design their attacks to simulate real-world adversaries. So as I said, it kind of helps leverage threat intelligence to emulate adversary behaviors. So anything that we find is a recent trend or maybe a recent tool, the red team or whoever can take that away to try and mimic that. So 2 tasks to achieve when doing threat intelligence-led testing. So we're able to do threat profiling. So when we write up our reports of our findings, we can then do a little bit of threat modeling. So the tester can not only profile the organization, but then identify different critical assets and resources just like an adversary would. We can also design that attack strategy to mimic that adversary that we've just profiled. So applying the different TTPs to attack an organization. So simulating microattack and things like that, but also discussing with the organization if they've perhaps had a previous breach or they've been targeted by a previous adversary, trying to copy over those tactics again to try simulate a more informed pen test or attack. Oh, there we go. So regular pen testing does not consider sort of TI. It's very sort of methodology based. You might have standard frameworks, processes, tooling that you use, and it does quite rely on tester efficacy. So if you're more experienced in Active Directory versus someone that's perhaps new to the industry, it might mean that you pop more boxes. It might mean you have different methodology, that kind of thing. And the great thing about threat intelligence-led pen testing is it relies on the TI output to shape those scenarios and different attack vectors. So every phase of that CTI sort of activity is then fed into the assessment, creating a more holistic sort of assessment that mimics that real world that a lot of organizations are worried about. So the big one being here, it focuses on real-world attack scenarios. So intelligence-led testing also allows organizations to have good adversary perception, which helps them combat adversaries that they are particularly worried about. So a lot of the time we do things like threat landscaping. We do a lot of workshops with stakeholders to see what they worry about, if they have any defenses that they think are a bit lacking, and if we know any adversaries that focus on those. And it provides that sort of holistic understanding of where they sit and their side of the stance. So information sharing. So it's great doing all this work, but again, it's not any use if you don't share it with anyone. So there are there are communities and different networks that gives organizations access to sort of real-time data about what's happening in their industry. So different things like threats and trends, new CVEs, that kind of thing. And it brings together, which is really good, industry, academia and government, which I think a lot of the time tend to sit in their own pool, particularly academia. So it's really good to be able to chat to those different organizations. So there's something called an information sharing and analysis center, which allows industry-specific sharing of information for threats. So you've got like aviation, automotive, financial, and that nice little graph is provided by Anissa, kind of shows the split of ISACs across Europe too. You've also got threat hunting activities. So I am not a threat hunting expert, so I definitely think that's something for a different talk perhaps, but threat intelligence could help input into those activities. So obviously when you're threat hunting, you're proactively trying to find threats in your network, but providing that intelligence into that can help inform around their collection of data, what they're looking for, and how perhaps adversaries are evading existing security controls. And as always, I've got to bring up AI. I think it's the AI theme this year, so it has to be mentioned. So machine learning and artificial intelligence can also help, I guess, cyber threat intelligence. It could help different processes and solutions advance themselves. So it could help improve CTI analytics, so they could faster respond to threats using both supervised and unsupervised models. A lot of the things we worry about as cyber intelligence analysts is biases, especially with human analytics. When you have confirmation bias, maybe some groupthink, it helps kind of reduce that bias that could be associated to humans. You can implement all sorts of wonderful things like predictive analytics. Reducing false positives and human errors is a big one, especially with large data sets. But you can also use bulk data analysis to find different patterns. And it could help with automated processes when we talk about alerts and detection. Not only that, but it can also help improve information sharing, so helping identify what key information can be used to be shared, the legal and ethical implications of sharing sensitive data, and helping establish the trust between two parties. So we'll bring back the little threat intelligence lifecycle, and we can sort of see here the different ways AI and machine learning can be sort of advance the different parts of that life cycle. So helping collect intelligence is a big one, helping parsing and normalizing that data so that humans can understand it, helping analysts prioritize their different sort of scoring that they might use in their analysis, personalizing different end results, so trying to create those reports or those briefings or those presentations, and then using customer feedback to try tailor future collection efforts as well. But there are, as a lot of challenges with cyber threat intelligence. As with anything in cybersecurity, we have to consider things that can go wrong as well. So a lot of things has happened in cybersecurity, and of course things will continue to change. It's quite a dynamic place. So another thing that we do worry about is the evolving threats, so the evolution of cybersecurity attack methods and trying to keep up with that, trying to keep up with what the bad guys and girls are doing, and trying to make sure we're one step ahead, as per se. So as you can see, in the 1980s, we obviously had some like ransomware, we had some worms, malware worms, hackers, all that scary stuff. But then that morphs into a much more complex cyber threat landscape as we move into the 2010s. So we think about supply chain, how critical third parties might affect an attack campaign against an organization. Ransomware as a service, when we move towards sort of double, triple extortion, rather than we've just locked you out your systems. Spear phishing, business email compromise. We've got a lot more things to think about as new things are happening every day. Too much data happens quite a lot. I just end up drowning in Excel spreadsheets. So we can usually end up with way too much data, and then it's really hard to analyze it and pick out what's useful to us and our objectives. So this is something that arguably machine learning and AI could potentially help. But it goes back to those defining the requirements, making sure that we're collecting the right data in the first place, and then tailoring that data during the analysis phase to make sure we're getting the right actionable stuff from it. Stakeholder buy-in. I do love a good corporate buzzword. So making sure that we have stakeholder buy-in from the organization, making sure we have that support, that resource, that allocation to allow us to do our jobs. And once we know what we're doing, kind of trying to mature that program to be more embedded in our organization. So not only thinking about preventing and detecting, but also around strategy, around those insights and advanced warning too. So how we can kind of go from, cool, we found the thing, we're going to implement the defenses, to profiling, strategy, trying to prevent it in the long term rather than the reactive in the short term. And there's loads of things we can do, or organizations can do with cyber threat intelligence. So integration with security operations, again, to enhance threat detection, response, and mitigation capabilities. Continuous monitoring and analysis. So we can use sort of CTI to establish mechanisms to try continually watch out for those emerging threats, vulnerabilities, attack patterns. Again, we have to try to think about being that proactive rather than reactive stance. Making sure we're sharing that information. I can't sort of emphasize how valuable it is to share that information, particularly with industry partners, academia, because everyone's going to have a different perception on it, but also they might have something new that you might not have thought about. So fostering that collaboration to try not only share that intelligence, but different insights and best practices and how they differ. Automation, so using things like AI and machine learning to help improve the mundane processing and dissemination of threat intelligence. Customizing threat intelligence. So as I said, there's going to be different sort of end users that receive that intelligence, making sure that the same bit of intelligence can be tailored to match that end user, to make sure they understand it and they're able to take it away and action that. And also tailoring threat intelligence to the specific risk profile of an organization. So a big bank will be having different sort of worries versus a automotive company, for example. They will have different priorities and different sort of intelligence requirements and risks they are worried about. Oh. Incident response planning. So threat intelligence analysts can help incident response teams improve their plans, improve their sort of reaction plans, especially if we know something's being abused and used by adversaries. They can then be more prepared for that. Regular threat hunting within an organization's network. There are unfortunately more and more regulations and standards as we kind of venture into the world of cybersecurity. So threat intelligence can also help with that. Keeping up to date with loads of technological advancements and all the new things happening. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, behavioral analytics, all those things that can be used in threat intelligence to help improve that. And I think I've spoken way too quickly because I think I whizzed through that in about 30 minutes, which unfortunately means there are time for questions. So I think I shot myself in the foot there. But if you did want to keep in touch, my name's Sophia. You can sort of find various different bits and bobs there. So there's the Ladies of Cheltenham Hacking Society, Twitter. You've also got the Security Queens Twitter, my personal account, add me on LinkedIn if you feel free to. And there's also Ladies Hacking Society and Security Queens as well, which we do monthly blog posts and a little newsletter if you did want to sign up. But yeah, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, or can I just run away? God damn it, Dan. Yes. Yeah. 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 So that's a very interesting question. I don't have an immediate sort of overnight answer for that, but I think a lot of it is translating it into the business risk and business objectives. So if we can try translate it into, cool, you can do this thing, it's going to save you X amount of money, or we're going to make sure you pass ISO 27001, that could potentially help with the stakeholder buy-in at sort of the top of the pyramid. I think threat intelligence can be used in different sort of departments and teams as well, not necessarily just the IT teams or, so being able to roll out awareness programs across the company to then increase the defenses that way is also a possibility, particularly with small and medium enterprises. That's something that's a bit more easier to kind of integrate rather than an entire threat intelligence team. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I think from my experience anyways, I think it's sort of a nice middle ground that a lot of the time, obviously coming across TLP red information, or for those people that don't know, it's very, very, you're not supposed to share it outside of the room, basically. Some of those insights could probably be beneficial for other parties, but at the end of the day, we're trying to kind of improve our defenses and improve our reaction to that. So if the release of that information is going to actually be more damaging than good, then it's still good to have these classifications. I think we're quite good in the threat intelligence community that we know kind of the limits around the good and the bad and balancing that. So I don't think it's necessarily harmful having these classifications, but it's just sort of being smart about it and making sure you're thinking about before you're talking. A lot of people do like the prestige as well, like, oh, I found this really cool thing, but I'm going to keep it to myself and it's going to be really cool and secretive. And I think we need to sort of break out of that, of like the cool kids club can only know about it, but actually sharing that knowledge, sharing that information could be beneficial for the wider community. Yes. Yeah. Yes, yeah. 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 So I think a lot of it goes back to, I think you remember me mentioning the information sharing and analysis centers. A lot of, private companies aren't necessarily a part of that. But providing that preview of what they could gain from that, I've found is actually a good way of sort of mildly soft introducing them into that. A lot of the time using case studies as well, like, oh, this company, did this and it turned out to do this. Is actually quite good using sort of hard evidence that collaborating, information sharing can actually be beneficial. Again, going back to but it's like the cool kids club. We don't want to share our information because it might give them strategic advantage. It might give them, a business advantage. It's just being smart about it, actually thinking like, is this going to harm my organization if I share this information, or actually is it going to help others? Yeah. Any questions before I hit the bar? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh God. That is a tricky question, and I am not an AI expert. But I think I'll sort of reiterate that a lot of the time when, humans analysing that data, we are worried that we're going to introduce our own biases on it. I know from my very limited understanding of AI and machine learning, you can sort of teach different models to allow that data to extract different things that will be relevant to your organization or your strategic objectives. Where it'll be in 5 years, I hope it won't put me out of a job. And I don't think it will. I think a lot of the time it's still having that human element, talking to the organization, talking to different stakeholders, actually sitting down, doing a workshop with them, talking about their worries and concerns. That's something AI can't really achieve. So it'll be a combination of both efforts, I think. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. 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 No, absolutely valid point. So I think with the industry-specific sharing initiatives, we are thinking of like very niche things that maybe, if we talk about financial institutions, maybe specific to Swift, for example, that someone in automotive or maybe industrials won't really care about because that's not something they use. But when it comes to kind of things like the NCSC, white papers, conferences where, you can share that very high level intelligence that's actually relevant to a lot more than outside your industry. That is something we should be thinking about at least. So with the industry specific sharing initiatives, I think at least my understanding and my sort of experience with that, it is very, very specific to that. Rather than talking about a generic topic like ransomware, they will be talking about specific IOCs or CVs to like an embedded sensor in a car, for example. I think we're quite good in breaking out of that and sharing beyond that, particularly when it comes to big trends like ransomware, phishing, social engineering, that kind of thing. Yeah. Anything else? No? Can I run away now? Thank you very much, guys.